Welcome everyone to this special AMA event with Luke Murphy. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Julie Dennis. I'm the Curator of Engagement and Digital Initiatives at Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art. And I am the curator of Luke's exhibition. His exhibition is called Pixel by Pixel, Interventions by Luke Murphy. This is his first solo museum exhibition, so I'm super excited to be able to have presented his work at SMOCA. So before we get started, I do want to recognize that this institution lies on the unceded sacred land of the O'odham and Peepash peoples and their Huhugam and Peepaneequar ancestors. Acknowledge and celebrate the Salt River Pima Maricopa communities, their elders both past and present, and generations to come. They are the original stewards of this land, and we are humbled to reside here. We honor the many diverse Indigenous peoples connected to this land that has sustained their people for centuries. They are an important part of our history, our present, and our future. So I am super excited to be here this evening with Luke Murphy, who is joining us from his studio in Harlem. Hi, Luke.
Hi, Julie. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay, thanks.
Good. It's a little late over there in New York. We realized the time just changed, so it's 7 here, but it's 10 p.m. there. So thank you for joining us so late this evening.
No worries at all. It's great.
So this is an AMA or an Ask Me Anything event. So please at all, anyone watching, if you have a question for Luke throughout the conversation, drop it in the YouTube chat, and we will have Luke answer that live. So first I want to kind of just start the conversation a little bit with Luke about his previous work and how he kind of came to where he is today in this particular body of work. So I want to share a photo of his early work. So Luke, you started out like much of your early work is actually painting.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to ask how you came about to kind of shift. What changed in your practice for you to shift from painting to the kind of tech LED works that you have as your primary medium right now?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I studied painting. I went to the my undergrad was at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, which is back in the not before I was there, but certainly at the tail end of when I was there in the 80s. It's sort of like had been a very important place for conceptual art. So a lot of what I had to unlearn as I got to New York in the 90s was this amount of conceptual art that was sort of how important that was there. And so that was always foremost in my mind, sort of what kinds of things were art or considered art. That was very much the Lawrence Wiener, Asher, LeWitt, Ryman model of what constitutes art, Flavin and such like. And then I studied at Purchase and did my MFA there. And I found that although when I moved to New York sort of in the early 90s, I had always been interested in computers, and I found myself more and more using computers even to make drawing. Actually, I used to make graphs a lot. In fact, for many years, part of my practice was just kind of making graphs of things. But I was always looking for ways of using computer, helping to make imagery, helping to make paintings. So even though I made a lot of paintings, they were always kind of in one way or other cycled through the computer. And then more and more it became like, especially after, in the 90s, late 90s, when sort of the internet got going, the idea of net art, I participated in a lot. So I started making that really part of what I did a lot. So the studio really involved a computer for always, even though I was making a lot of paintings, and it was really the computer and the coding was very much part of what I did. And then sort of I worked at some very, generally what I did is I like a lot of people, artists move to New York, you get a job doing art handling or painting or whatever it is, you do whatever you can get. And I got kind of tired of doing a lot of art handling, and people told me, hey, you got some computer skills, you could probably do a little better if you use those skills for something. And the internet was just sort of kicking off. So I kind of lied my way into a couple of jobs, and was able to start picking up sort of on the internet tech, and rapidly got into from moving from sort of design into back end and coding, and really the sort of the code structures of whatever made up the internet at the time. Of course, at the time it was not large. It was fairly rudimentary when building web pages. But and so I ended up working quite a bit in large media corporations and building big commercial websites, spending a lot of time in Times Square, actually, because I worked at MTV for a long time. And so saw pretty deep exposure to LED boards, which always fascinated me. In fact, the ad guys would come in and they would say that if they would look at all the boards, and they would look at and they could tell the health of the advertising industry by how many boards were lit up with and how fast the rotation was on the ads and what was. Anyway, it was kind of interesting. Anyway, I was interested very much in also. This is going to be a tricky jump, but I was interested a lot in the history of the in Cold War, really, of Cold War and the atomic bomb and the production of the atomic bomb, mainly because the formation of the atomic bomb and the formation of abstract expressionism, as well as kind of the formation of country music, all kind of happened at the same time, and they're all kind of these synthetic structures in a weird way. Anyway, I had been collecting Geiger counters for a long time, and found that I could, when I got a good working one going, I could hear if I turned it on, I could hear the ticks of the Geiger counter from ambient radiation. And I had always wanted to sort of somehow harness that sort of amazing thing, because what you're hearing when you hear a tick from a Geiger counter is a particle or a number of particles coming and hitting this tube and causing a little tiny spark, which is amplified. So you're hearing this kind of particle that you would normally have, apart from a cloud chamber, would never see or have any interaction with. And they're all around. And then it's also the fact that the frequency, the time between ticks is perfectly random. It's absolutely random, because at the quantum level, you can never tell when if you have a chunk of uranium and it's just a natural piece of uranium, it's giving off electrons, which is beta radiation, among other things, some alpha radiation and some X-rays. But the frequency that the emissions happen are random, because you can only tell the probability of when they will go, not when they would go. So at a core, you can never predict the time between each of the sort of ticks. Anyway, I used it to start producing random numbers, and using those random numbers to feed into some of my animation pieces. And so I had a show, I think it's 2005 or something, that was sort of inspired by when Iran had first announced that it had enriched uranium. So they'd basically taken uranium-238 and enriched it to weapons grade 20% uranium-235, which is the fissionable uranium. And they had this insane image of them sort of parading, Ahmadinejad and his entourage parading with these vials of uranium-235, which would cost $1 billion, or something. But I couldn't believe they had them in their hands, if they were really the ones they were doing. And they were dressed in sort of so-called local ethnic garb, as they would describe. And they were doing this sort of dance. And there were pictures of birds and doves behind it and the flag, and the colors were beautiful. Anyway, I made a number of pieces around that and showed it. So in the gallery, there was a vase of uranium glass, which is a sort of very mild uranium colored glass. And I had Geiger counters around it that were harvesting the emissions and producing random numbers and driving the pieces around it. Anyway, the long story is that the next time I had to do a show, I couldn't really bring myself to do another screen-based or simply projection kind of work. I always find it so hard to see a screen in a gallery. It's just like one of the worst, sometimes some of the worst experiences, because your relationship to a screen is usually one of control. So you usually, when you in front of a screen, you usually got a mouse and you got a keyboard or something, and you're in control. So when you're deprived of things, you're just presented with something playing on a screen, on a computer screen, you're already in a kind of awkward position if you're used to, as we all are used to sort of running things on your own machine. And so that kind of interactive work was always kind of problematic for me. And I'd been very much interested in these LED pieces, and I started playing around with them. And so I started making work based using them because I like their physicality, and I could break the rectangle. I wasn't subservient to the rectangle of the screen, and break some of that seamlessness that you get in a lot of technology. Anyway, sorry, that's a long rant on.
No, it was great. It was great. It was so good. Can you talk a little bit? You kind of touched on it a little bit. Can you talk about like the process, like your process of making an artwork from beginning to end? Like, is it pretty similar each time, or does it depend? Like, do you come with an animation first sometimes, or like the code, and then you try to figure out the object, or do you have the object? Like, what comes first?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Like you said, it's not always the same thing. I mean, a lot of times I will have an idea for an animation, or I've found an animation, or a kind of, and I should mention also that with these pieces, they all run by computer. So while there's an animation, it doesn't exactly repeat. It may have the same kind of form, but it's actually constantly, I'm always running it off a lot of random parameters. So it's constantly randomized. So although the structure may look like it sort of stays the same, because it's the actual instances, the variations are all random done. So they don't really repeat these pieces in a funny way, even though they're kind of repeating a similar form. So a lot of times when I make there might be a kind of a form or an animation I really like, and then I may try it on a bunch of different types of configurations of the screen, until they kind of make sense. Other times I'm really pretty sure about the structure, and I think certainly sometimes, like the ones I did with some ladders, sometimes with some posts, and the campfire pieces, and even the tower. Those ones I was really sure about I knew the form was right. I knew that was kind of what I wanted. I wanted it either half falling or half held up together, and then it was just trying to find the right animation that would fit for the piece. And I would try a lot of different things until it felt right, because you can put a lot of things on these.
Yeah.
And also, as sort of a friend of mine, Sarah, told me one thing that you don't want to do in some funny way with these things, you don't want to really, if you make the image too much like a screen, you stop seeing it as an object. And so so it's kind of tricky sometimes with these pieces. You don't like if I put regular video on them, sometimes it works, but again, you start to look through them at the image, not at the whole thing. So it's always a bit of a balance. In some of these recent ones, and I'm just gonna go out of frame here. I've been playing around a little bit with some of these ones, and you can see this other one up here that's got a tower. I like the way that there's a movement, and I like sparklies and that kind of thing. But what I like is also it also dissolves a bit, and so you start to see the way the whole thing's kind of put together. Yeah.
So
And
we actually had a question from Instagram, which kind of goes along with this, asking about what language you primarily use when you program your artworks.
okay, yeah. So most of it, what I use is I'll go over to the computer and people. I use mostly I use Python for most of my work.
Hmm.
Um, I found it's pretty straightforward. It's a great language. It's very clean, easy to read. Um,
Hmm.
Most of the pieces I'm using something. I'm using some browser-based stuff now, encapsulated in something called Electron, which is a packaging system, and I'm using it for a few things, but generally almost everything's Python. And
Hmm.
so I can create these kind of little self-contained applications in Python and then run them on a computer. Every piece, I don't know if it's hard to see, but every piece has a configuration file. So the code, so I set up a lot of parameters like
Hmm.
so there may be a piece, like for instance, if I go to this, um, like even these ones here, there's a kind of, I set a set of like boundaries or parameters for how they work, the kind of range of colors they run, the speed that they run, the types of transitions, uh, those kinds of configurations, they're all done in these configuration files. And so
Okay.
one piece can be reused. And like, it's true, for instance, like if, like even this quilt one has a couple variations that I can set up. I can
Hmm.
choose the types of patterns it runs and how fast they change and that kind of thing.
Great. So talking about, like, we can see the variety of forms of the works in your studio right now. You kind of use screens and kind of somewhat undermine their form and intended function, which you kind of touched on earlier. So in a way, you're kind of like subverting the tech itself and kind of also embracing the rawness of the materials. Like, when some
Yeah.
of your works are installed, you can sometimes see, you can walk around them, you can see the back of the screen, you can see sometimes the what's running it. So you're kind of embracing the materiality of, um so how, like, can you talk about why you're interested in embracing these technological imperfections, and your interest in, like, this idea of, like, the glitch and the cracked screen. And for most of us, like, if our computer or our phone is glitching or it's cracked, it's like a disaster for us. So, like, what makes you, what's appealing to those things to you, and why do you like to kind of show them in a different light as something that can be potentially seen as beautiful?
Well, I think I mean, it's a couple things. One, um, I was always amazed when I, drive around the city and look around. You see all these signs, either they're bodega signs or they're the meat trucks or the the nail salon on the second floor or something. They all have these LED signs, trying to getting people excited. And a lot of times they're kind of busted. They're like, they've been, the water's gotten in on them, a couple circuits are going and half the screen is off, or it's always colored green. And yet they're still going, they're still working hard, they're just putting out their messes, they're sort of sad, but they're also kind of like still working really hard and trying to get
Mhm.
this advertising message out. And there's something quite appealing about that. And so I wanted to capture a little of that aspect. And there's also there is, and of course there is a big glitch aesthetic out now. I mean, there's a whole, everyone, there's like ways of glitching images in myriad ways of filters and stuff like that produce a glitch. And I think I'm sort of always interested in, like, why do we like the glitch? Is it I mean, in the simplest way, we like it because it sort of gives us a little bit of power over this technology that we have. It shows the faults in it, that it's not
Mhm.
as stable as we like it to believe, or that it purports to be. And I think there's something to that. I think that's certainly important. Um, and also, the way I sort of frame it for myself also is that you know most of the time when we produce, we make like technical stuff that we use, our phones, our tablets, the programs we write, they're meant to be as seamless and smooth as possible. I think I told you before, like, you know, when you're making an iPad app, they used to say, or an iPhone app, you want to feel like you're petting the cat. So it has to be so smooth and so faultless that you don't even know you're using something. And that's very important in a lot of times for software. You don't want it to get in the way. You don't want to be thinking about it. And it's exactly the opposite of what happens in art. You know, where you want to be really aware of the texture of the art. You want to be really aware of the. It's all about kind of. It's about being very aware of all the structures and all the things possibly going wrong. So they're really like completely opposite kinds of worlds. So I wanted to kind of jam those things together a little bit. And so that's why I started breaking up the surface of the screen. I thought that was like, you know, I think everybody wants to kind of break up the surface of the screen. So but these way I'm making these ones, I've seen it done outside, you know, like just now, how do I make it into a more sculptural form? So I really do, that's, you know, and then you have a little bit of it kind of, I think it helps you kind of come in a little bit or lean in a little bit more to the pieces, especially ones like the quilt or these other ones that are sort of collapsed, and they're collapsed and they're under their weight, but they're still working hard. They're still trying to pick themselves up and keep going. And I think I like that aspect of it.
Yeah.
You know.
So you also sometimes use found objects in your work. And I'll, you know, a lot of them are very, I mean, they're very analog. It's not like a found like technological thing. It's like things like a ladder, or in the case of the artwork Blue Line Crossing that you have at Smoka, it's like a police barrier. So how do you decide on when you want to incorporate the found object in an artwork, and what first inspired you to do this? Like, do you find the object and want to use it in a piece and immediately get an idea, or again, like, do you have an idea for a piece and then you want to use and you find an object that you want to use?
Yeah, I think in some ways they're like, I mean, they're usually pretty specific. I think that, you know, that a lot of times I like using some things that have sort of a rural origin, because I'm always interested in sort of rural work. A long time ago, I used to make when I was getting going, I was making paintings. I used to make paintings because I used to work as a sheep shearer at the summer job, and I would shear sheep on a canvas and then just present this thing, and it would be this sort of giant abstract thing made of, you know, oil and blood and shit and thing, but the idea was it was sort of a picture of work, sort of and I've always been interested a little bit in that thing, maybe because I like voice a lot, and there's some element to that in it. But so like, for instance, in this piece here, that's that's an old lobster buoy. So that whole piece is called Setting the Traps, and it's from my home in Nova Scotia, and there's a kind of so there's a little bit of a nostalgia, but it's also just trying to filter thinking about it through the disparity between that work and now, and it's pretty simple that way. And the ladders started, I mean, I've always been interested in ladders, partly because I really keep trying to recreate these drawings that Robert Flood did, who's a sort of a 16th century polymath, but also the ladders I was using, those ones, they came from my family's farm, and so they have a kind of and they're old discarded ladders that were used for painting. And so I wanted to use them, so they have a certain resonance for me, and so there's always a little bit of that. And also I whenever I use them, I wanted them to be kind of either supporting these pieces, or they almost always would be supporting the pieces. So it's like the pieces, the electronics are kind of using the ladder to kind of go up, get ahead, or go up, or move, or stay in place, or to be supported. And then in another one I've got a chair that I found across the street. There's a sort of an old folks home across the street, an elderly care place. And when sometimes the residents die, you see their entire life just put on the street, and just their old furniture and stuff like that. And I found a chair there that was just this beautiful chair, crackled surface, painted many times, and just seemed insane that it was thrown away. So I took that chair and put a quilt piece kind of intersected with it, because that sort of just made a kind of an actual intersection with the chair. So a lot of times the pieces, they have to have a kind of, there has to be something about them. They're carrying some baggage or something. Some of those down pieces.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And on the other side though, I do also use a lot of I'm started using keyboards again, because I made a keyboard cave a couple years ago, and I've always wanted to kind of get back to it, because I also something that's amazing when you get these. I buy these used keyboards in bulk, and you get these keyboards, and they're people have taped little instructions on it, or they painted out some things, or repainted the keys, and the keys are off. If you can see they're worn down, because someone's been using this thing for like 4 or 5 years, and it's got all this residue of their use on it, and then just like discarded. And I find that just amazing. It's just like there's so much trace of our interaction with this object in order to push numbers, code, text, whatever through, and you're left with this thing. So I really like using those things when there's something about those ones that even they look like this kind of this sort of junky text thing, but they have a lot of character, because someone spent a lot of time using them. And so I like using those things in some pieces. You can see them now kind of showing up in some of these other ones now.
So you have talked about before how humanity is kind of like inherent to technology, like it's part of technology. And so we actually got a question from Instagram about how you think technology can be humanized, or how you see humanity in something as sterile as a screen. And I think you've kind of touched on it a little bit with like this idea of these traces of humans that have made their mark on technology that you use sometimes. But can you talk a little bit more about that idea of like humans and tech, and how you see them connected so much?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not the first to point out that there's probably nothing more human than technology. I mean, it is not apart from us. I mean, maybe sometimes the technology may feel so advanced but it really is just part. It's built by humans. All the work, I'll often come back to the fact that when you look at a screen and you look at the single one pixel, the pyramid of people to allow that pixel to turn on and change color, there must be at least 10,000 people involved to make that happen as it's happening right now. There are so many things come into allowing that to happen. There just couldn't be. It just isn't just squirted out by aliens. I mean, this is we're deeply involved in it. It's also made for us. It's not like and I think this is something that I sometimes get a little, when there's a lot of talk about social media and the big tech companies, like, we have to take some responsibility too, because our desires, our needs, our things that we're responding to, we push people to make things that satisfy us. So we're as much responsible, all of us, for how things operate and what happens. So so the technology is it's just not outside of us. It's like language. It's like there is no outside of language. There's just, and in many ways there's just no outside of technology. It's like everything it is an absolute extension of us.
Mhm.
And so sometimes, that being said, there are people who want to make a lot of money off the technology, and they certainly do. And maybe there's a lot of effort to kind of coat it and make it feel more like it's some sort of mysterious thing. And I think maybe, artists are pretty good at kind of busting that open a little bit, cracking the screen, so to speak. I think Namjoon Pike certainly did that a great deal, and there are many others too. But but I don't. It is something that we are so tethered to. We make all the time. It's just not. It's hard. It's almost like the effort should really be to see that it is. We're in it. We are it. We're even screens. There's not. They're just things. They're just things made by people.
Yeah. Well, and you also talk about like the fragility of technology. Like we're aiming to be more and more durable, but it's still, it's still made out of materials that can have the potential of breaking. And you see those connections too with like the fragility of humans and the fragility of technology.
Oh yeah, and it's a little bit of a lesson I got like during one of the things they talked about during 9/11 was that while giant earthquakes and storms and natural disasters are sort of terrifying, we have we sort of accept them. We don't, but the technical nature of 9/11, where technology, what we think of as technology, we think of our infrastructure turned against us, so to speak, is way more terrifying. So we have a great fear of that it produces more fear in us. And I think that's also the fragility of it. Like we are really scared of, as much as we may have a kind of sometimes an ambivalent or dependent, a relationship. It's that dependency on technology also gives us a great deal of fear. So we are, so the fragility is actually an important thing that I think is actually an important thing to be constantly aware of and constantly taking and accounting for. That's okay. Yeah. It's just, it's like people, some they're strong and also they're weak and they break, or, that's just what happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
These devices, that's all they do. They do the same thing.
Yeah. We have an audience question. As an artist working with technology, how or what are you thinking about the intersection of art and NFTs, the golden, the question of the year, it seems like.
Yeah, NFTs are so tricky. I mean, NFTs are receipts, right? They're like super receipts. They're like they're a record of. They could be a record of a transaction. They're not art. And I think that, I know that a lot of people are very upset about Wiki not including them as art, but it's quite true that the actual thing, the NFT, the non-fungible token, is, it's, for all intents and purposes, it's a text file that's embedded in a blockchain, and it's got a code, and the code, the actual code that is the NFT, is something called a token URI, which is a pointer, a URL that points to another file, and in that file, it points to where the digital asset is as well as where the image is. So the actual art, if there's art being represented, is actually somewhere else. The NFT is just a recording. It's just a path to it. It's like a here's really is. It's here's your receipt. Go pick up your artwork over here. And there's a lot of issues with it. I mean, I'm really happy that some digital artists are making some money off of things that, for many years were completely impossible to sell. Like how can you sell this stuff? It doesn't. So I do like that part of it. On the other hand, I'm a little bit sad too that, part of the fun about digital art and part of the fun thing about net art was that it was completely unsaleable. So it had certain kind of purity. I mean, sure, not for nothing, it was based on, quite a bit of capital to make it, but it was, it wasn't innocent, but it wasn't uncompromised, but it had a kind of there was something interesting about it. So I don't know how to, I'm not I've made it. I don't know what to think about the NFT world. I know that there's a lot. I am concerned by the fact that so much of the NFT activity over the last while has really been to benefit people in cryptocurrency, and so that there's quite a bit of the pumping up of stuff, and the activity is really to get more money flowing into, like, hard money, hard currency, and hard activity flowing into the crypto world. So that's always concerning. There's so we should be always aware of that stuff. Yeah.
So
I can't remember who the artist was, or always remind me. And maybe it was Corey Arkin. I can't remember what it says. So, basically, your gifts run on diesel. And it's like, yeah, that's right. You got to be careful about this stuff. The cloud is extremely dirty.
For sure.
Right. 98% of it is warm standby, warm failover, just things staying hot. So there's 99.99% uptime for everything. So blockchain is no different. Yeah.
So as technology, it's constantly changing and advancing. So it's basically the nature of technology. It's progress. So how do you see that impacting your personal artistic practice and the materials you use? Like, do you see yourself moving in different ways and using different technology, or is it more like you're okay continuing to use the tech that you're using right now because that feels like it's true to your practice?
That's a tricky one. Yeah, I'm always open for new stuff. I mean, I think it's but it also has to feel right. It has to, there's there has to be something that you can, like all stuff, like any time artists or anybody starts playing around with new tech. Actually, sometimes the very beginning of new tech is sometimes the most interesting part. When people don't know what to do with it, and they're inventing new ways of playing with the medium, video, like that. Tons of ones like that. Net art, I think, leading internet stuff, definitely like that. I think for me, I'm really like, I love painting. I always look at painting. I keep looking at painting, even though so there's the painter aspect of these displays, I think, is important to me, and so I do. And there's really still quite a lot that I want to play with, other types of ways of, because it's still kind of very much part of our culture. These things are the most ubiquitous.
Yeah.
They're the new neon or something. I don't even know. They're just they're everywhere, and screens are everywhere. So that still seems like something I need to play around with right now. I am somewhat, but I like the physical part. I like the fact that they kind of exist dimensionally. So I'm not. I've moved away from things like AR, VR, and those kinds of things. Other kinds of places where people are making some interesting stuff. It's not quite for me right now.
Yeah. Well, again, it's about like the materiality too. Like you can see that like the material is an important part of how you create your work, and you've talked before about like your background in painting. You see that translated on the screens, that you see like when you're putting the pixels together and coding like that, you approach that with like the mindset of a painter or a sculptor trying to cut things away. So you can still see that influence of painting in the work that you're doing here.
Yeah, I don't think I can. It's they're and I do when I'm coding stuff, it's a lot like it is a lot like paint mixing or chipping away at stuff. It's just a kind of human activity, like trying to adjust things till they you don't. I mean, the trick a little bit sometimes is with these screens, they're automatically, they grab a lot of attention because that's what they're kind of built for. So it's always a little bit tricky and screens also do that. You put a screen in a room with a painting, and suddenly it'll suck all the energy out of the room, and everyone's going to look at that, not the painting. so you have to find a way of not going against that, but using that for some other kind of taking it up a notch or something. It's like, don't.
Yeah. We have a question in our chat. Can you discuss your early internet art, your mile-long page?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's, yeah, again, it was super early on. It was like 90, I don't know, it was 96 or something like that. And I had been looking at, there my conceptual art background or early formative stuff was that I was thinking about Walter de Maria's. He did two pieces. One, he did the broken kilometer, but he also did one called a vertical kilometer, which is like, pounded these beautiful brass rods down a vertical. So I was thinking, like, I'll make an internet version of that. I'll make a line that extends 1 mile long in pixels that you can jump through or you can scroll it. And so that's what it was, because it was a kind of it seems so, it's just kind of like it just doesn't make, it's the kind of physical thing you don't really expect out of a web page. It's really not supposed to be physical at all. So I really wanted to, I was quite happy when I was playing around those. I made a mile square and a mile long page. And I kind of wanted to make a light year long page. But that was going to be, it would, at the time, the rendering wasn't going to happen. There was no way it was going to render. So I just stuck it like a mile, it's just a certain number, it's like 72 pixels per inch times the number of inches in a mile, and that's it.
Yeah.
We did joke, I was joking with people about that. It's like, if I made the light year long page and then you clicked on it, because you could click on the, the jump link, it would be like you would be able to travel faster than the speed of light, because you would have jumped across this light year long page. And I figured, like, suddenly poof, the aliens would show up and say congratulations.
Oh, I love it. So we're getting down to that time where we want to kind of wind down. I do want to ask you though, is there anything that you're currently working on that you can talk about, or that you can show us in your studio at all? Are there any works that you really want to focus on that you have behind you over there?
Yeah, so these ones, I'll get out of the frame for a second, but yeah, these are the ones I'm kind of like, these 4 or 5 that are going on. These are the ones I'm working on right now. And I'm pretty, these are things I want to show, I want to use. The Broken Glory one there, that is sort of a callback to a piece I did before, and I have to a little bit of structural things to do to make it a little more robust. And then this other one I'm still working on a little bit here, this sort of one, this vent one that goes up and angles off. It's like it's a bit of a take on Brancusi's Bird in Space, like a really crappy version of it. But it's still trying hard. And then I'm working on this one here, which is like this other piece I made a while ago called Disruptor, which was a keyboard column where they fire and circled it. But this time I wanted to draw the line of the glitched fire in space. And then there's one behind it, you can kind of see that's like this, that I'm sort of in the middle of, although there's parts I really like about how it's now, it's this heavy sort of 10 by 10, 10 inch by 10 inch wood beam with keyboards holding this cluster of LEDs above it. And then there's ones in the back, which I'm working on these ones because I really, really love cores and want to play a little bit more with the structures around a core, around a and how that works, and how these things sort of span across them. And hopefully we'll start building some more keyboard caves. You can see my keyboard chair.
Oh yeah, the keyboard chair. I love it. Luke, your audio is a little bit, it sounds a little bit.
Sorry, I think I changed where I was, so sorry about that.
No, you're fine. There was one last question about the campfire pieces that you do, and in particular, we have Campfire 2.1 at Snoka, and so there's kind of a couple questions about this piece here. So we have a question about for the animation specifically for this, did you like study, the movement of flames and campfires, or was it something that you kind of just, did you take a video clip? How did you animate this? Like, the person says it seems like it's as if the shifting of color and pattern is completely random. Is it random, or is there some sort of repetition if you look at it long enough?
There's repetition. And so what I did was, some of these ones I use actual footage of flame that I run. I have a loop, and I'll cut it up and like programmatically cut it up at random and paste it. So it really doesn't. It changes constantly, and it's all driven by randomness on that. Even though there might be one sort of one sequence that I'm using, I can redo it. So it really may see things that sort of repeat, but they're not repeating the same way. And then there's the other way to do it is to build algorithmic flame, which is done all over, any kind of CGI that you've seen in a movie or something like that. There's like ways of doing it, and they're usually done by something that they call particle systems. And really what it is you create a sort of a system of tiny little pixels that are moving, but you make them move in a naturalistic way. And you just write certain parameters on how their color changes and how they move. And you use something that everybody in the world uses, something called Perlin noise, which is a kind of an algorithm for predictable natural it's like a randomness gradient that you can kind of predict. Anyway, you use this stuff to kind of, so I built these ones, and I built little tiny, like little animations that look like flames going. And then actually what I used that is, and then I started breaking it apart so that you actually would see the algorithm part a little bit more. I make it less realistic. So I start off realistic, and then I pull it back to the point where you can kind of, it sort of looks like flame, but you can also tell it's a lot of coding going on, or it's not as, and that's when I kind of would use a lot for those campfires. So I would sometimes I would mix the two together and let them kind of shift back and forth between the realistic, it's all chopped up and turned integrated, to something that's purely algorithmic, but kind of exposing itself at the same time as sort of what it is. But the shape and the movement is always sort of like, it's meant to look like flame, and it's meant to look like the sparks fly once in a while, and that's important. But it's not. I don't want it purely realistic either. I don't want it to be simply a mimetic kind of thing. It's always just kind of like aware of what it's doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that helps with it.
Yeah. No, it does. It definitely does. Okay, one final question before we close out. This is kind of just like in a dream world, if you had an unlimited budget and access to any tech that you wanted, is there an artwork that would be a dream for you to create? Like, would you go monumental? Would you go, would it be in like an architectural space? Like, what would be like a dream?
Oh, I would love to make a giant, massive bonfire piece, like huge, but it would have to be driven by absolutely pure randomness, like true, like the Geiger counter, like coming off of cosmic randomness. And the best way to do it is something that they actually have right now is this thing called, from quantum entanglement. So the thing that drives quantum computers, there are ways of using that kind of sort of unknown to generate absolutely pure random numbers based on the way photons interact with each other as they move through some electronics. So I would love, and I even have been talking to this one lab in England that have built this sort of thing that actually plugs in as a USB, but it uses quantum entanglement. So it uses this whole deep quantum principle of producing absolutely random, totally unpredictable, like no possible predicting random numbers. I'd love to drive it out of that, like something that is completely on the edge of our understanding, but it can produce random numbers and drive a gigantic fire piece. That would be great fun.
I would love that too. I do have to say, Campfire is kind of like, it's a hit at Smoka. Everyone loves it. We've gotten comments like, has it been made specifically for the space that it's in? And no, it hasn't. It kind of just, it was just meant to be. It's such a great piece. And the funny thing about your Campfire pieces is that, you know, they do resemble a campfire, but they also, like, it becomes a gathering place, just like a real campfire does for people. Like, people really do gather around it and just kind of stare at it, and it's kind of like a moment of zen for a lot of people. So it's wild how it can be something artificial, still serve the same purpose as, you know, a real campfire in that sense.
No, I love that. I mean, that alcove is just so perfect for where it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't ask for a better spot for it.
It is perfect. So Luke, thank you so much for showing us around your studio this late New York evening. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and participated in this very first AMA event for Smoka. I invite all of you to come check out Luke's exhibition before it closes on April 10th. And look forward to hopefully seeing people at future events at Smoka. So check our website, smoka.org, for what we've got going on. And I hope everyone has a fantastic weekend.
Thanks a lot, Julie. Thanks everybody for